Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dear comrades, what this debate is about is how we define morality. What it should not be about is how we define communism, but let me deal with that first and then move into the more essential parts of this debate, right? We have so far three: the Marxist, the utopian, and the essentialist. I'm going to deal with all three, right? Inherent to the Marxist one is an idea of class struggle, for example, so it's hardly the beautiful world in which we all agree what should be done, right? To the utopian one, the essence of that idea is though a welfare state, right? Basic needs should be met. We do not say that this is something that is essentially communist, we say this is a part of communism, but if there are other parts making it immoral, then this fact, even if we agree that it's good, does not automatically make it moral. And then the essentialist proposed by the first government, which we believe is completely reasonable, which is, look, the essence of all communist theory is a redistribution of good, all good, based on a claim that all humans are equally valuable regardless of their contribution. This is what we say is amoral, and are now going to define immorality through my speech, dealing with three different points, which is the essence of humanity that disappears in communism, the question of equal values or equal playing rules, and the question of whether or not we contribute equally. Does that mean that we're all equally valuable, and how taxation differentiates from communism, right? Okay. Now, a couple of points of rebuttal to the previous speaker. Firstly, notice the language she uses. You will be ostracized. You will be pressured. You need to add into the community. Madam Speaker, this is obviously not an extension of free will, but rather an outside pressure that the communist state puts on you as an individual in order to force you to do some things. Two things. People get in the contract with the state. Not that easy, guys. First of all, I do not choose to contract any state and enter a social contract. Secondly, I do not even choose to be born or have to engage with other human beings in any way or form. These are things that I have been born into, not agreed upon at any point in my life as an individual. They are just facts of life. Thirdly, they claim that because being 100% selfish is immoral, therefore being selfish at all is immoral. Now I think it is intuitive to say that I'm not immoral if I refuse to give my kidney to a random person just because they need it, okay? So this is to an point selfish, but nobody expects me or would claim that the only moral act is to give up, for example, parts of my bodily integrity, even if other people really, really need them, because we recognize my individual basic human right on self-determination, ownership of my body, and by an extent things I create with my body or brain in some cases, I guess. And the last thing, they say that property isn't the essence of humanity, but expression is. Mr. Speaker, expression is sometimes directly tied to property. When I create content, that this content is my property, I express it in my work, I express it in my art, and I express it in my interactions with other human beings. So while not all property is necessarily humanity, a lot of my property is tied to my expression in humanity. What they themselves conceive should be a measure in this debate. So I'm now going to talk about the essence of our case, right? Equal value versus equal rules. Madam Speaker, we do not agree with the basic idea of communism, that regardless of my internal motivations, regardless of how I agree to participate in a society, regardless of if or I do or do not take others' needs into consideration into my account, I am an equally valuable participant in this society. We believe it is inherently immoral to claim that human beings, regardless of how they act towards other human beings, are equally valuable to a society. Now, first of all, this applies to people who are just really, really evil people. But secondly, and this moves into my second point, which is how this ties to property directly, is we recognize that contribution and different contribution is differently valuable to a society. We can agree with the first to an extent that a cleaner is as necessary for the functional of a society as a CEO, because streets should be clean and companies should be run. What we do reject is this idea that also subjective value should be treated equally and subjective choices of interacting with humans should be treated equally. Let me give you an example. While we agree and think art is beautiful, we do not believe that an artist necessarily, especially an artist that targets a specific understanding of people, contributes to the society in the same way that a person that makes sure that the society functions well. So even under their assumption of, oh, we should all function well, their entire case of why this would be moral fails. These people are simply not equal contributors to the society. But on a more important at a more essential level, and this is where we get into the essence of this debate. We believe that communism in itself denies our humanity. Okay, what do I mean with this? We believe that what differentiates us from animals, and this whole discussion of what our basic needs are, what are not, we're going to say that everybody agreed on, food and shelter and stuff. But what differentiates us from animals is not even social structures, what is they're focusing on, but rather the right to self-determine my own existence as a human being. This is something that is essential to humans. This is something that is in direct conflict with the theory of communism that makes it amoral, right? So I, as a human being, have a right to self-identify in the best possible way in a situation I was involuntarily placed in. I have a right to make personal choices about whether or not and to which extent I will contribute to the society. I have the right to make individual choices of how I interact before I finish closing.
Yeah, Nika, you keep telling we recognize that this is something that in general we think we have. Can you please explain to us why we have it, since we're having a debate in which we're completely changing the structure of our society? You can't just assume because that our society right now recognizes it, it's true?
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm explaining. I'm explaining the idea of morality as human, right? Because we have the capacity to understand morality, unlike animals. Therefore, what defines our morality is what defines us as humans different from animals. This is not functional society because bees have that, ants have that. What is individually human and therefore in human interactions moral is allowing other humans expression of themselves, their opinions, decision on how much they're going to contribute, and decision on what elements created by their body and mind they get to keep. We recognize progressive taxation allows for things like basic needs, but progressive taxation is not communism, okay? Satisfying people's basic needs is good, but it has nothing to do, or nothing necessarily to do with communism. What is essential to communism is redistribution of all, and this is immoral. Very proud to propose.
Recognize member of opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we think it's obviously there's been a lot of different definitions of what moral might be in today's debate, and we don't think that anyone so far has actually given us a sufficient reason to believe that their particular moral system is the one that we should be using in order to determine whether or not a system can be moral. What Yair and I are going to do for you today is try and engage on as many different levels as we can and try and explain to you how we beat every single team in their own conception, but also to tell you that the reason that communism is a moral system is because it puts people into a system where they have the ability to make free choices that will benefit not only themselves but everyone else in the community, and that is what this collective system actually means. That is how, through the lens of virtue ethics, this will operate to make people make better decisions, but decisions that are also free decisions. So what am I going to do in this speech? First of all, I want to directly respond to what we just heard from Nika about where morals come from and the right to self-determine. Then I want to talk a little bit about free will. Then I'm going to talk about why we don't actually think that this analysis that we get from the government bench on property rights stands up in this debate. And then lastly, I'm going to go on again to talk about the benefits of collectivism. So first of all, closing government just get up and say to you, well, the way that we should make moral decisions in this debate are based on what it makes humans different from animals, because that is how we define morality, right? They give practically no explanation as to why this should be the metric in which we make that decision. I mean, they give a couple of reasons to believe that this isn't true. First of all, we would say that in some cases, animals do have the ability to make self-determinate decisions about what they do. We think that there are lots of animals like whales and dolphins, Hashish about that, and all other sorts of monkeys that actually do have the ability to make the kinds of decisions that they want to talk about. But second of all, we would say that it is by no means a given that this separation between humans and animals is morally determinative, unless you're going by what's written in the Bible or something, because actually we would say there are a number of rights that animals and humans share, and a number of things that we would hold to be true. We think that a utilitarian framework can apply just as well to animals as it can to humans. So we think the entire axioms that they're taking in order for their case to function simply aren't justified in this debate, and that's like one of the main reasons why their case falls down. Right? But second of all, right, let's talk a little bit about free will, because the government wants to say again and again, people don't have the ability to have free will in this system because they don't consent to it because of the lottery of birth, blah blah blah. First of all, right, this applies to literally any political system, right? So in that sense, you're also not free in a capitalist system, you're also not free in a monarchy or any other kind of system that you might want to say. So we don't think that really shows us a reason why communism is immoral in comparison to other systems, right? Second of all, right, when they want to talk about things like seizing property and the government taking away your rights, that is something where you're talking about, no, not necessarily like the example of the USSR, but what you are talking about is the implementation of communism, right? The theory of communism is existing in which a system in which there is no such thing as a property right. That right was never even dreamt into existence, right? Because the point is that everything is owned collectively and everyone shares everything. So you can't actually frustrate someone's right to have property if that right didn't exist in the first place, right? Second of all, on things like autonomy. Nika uses this great example of a kidney, right? She says, okay, we wouldn't ask someone to give up their kidney for someone else's benefit because that would be a violation of their bodily autonomy. First of all, we say it's pretty unlikely that you're going to have to ask someone to give away an essential thing like a kidney, right? Because then people wouldn't be equal anymore. In our ideal equal society, everyone would have as many kidneys as they need. But second of all, right, if you can show to me that giving away this kidney is going to be enough to be to go out and save the lives of 10 other people, then that's something we're perfectly happy to weigh on our side of the house, right? Because we say that you do actually have a better utilitarian outcome when more people are better off as a result of one person having something taken away from them. And as I'm going to go on to prove later, we don't think that any one individual has a right to the ownership of anything. We don't think there's any such thing as just desserts or people's ability to deserve something, and therefore we're actually perfectly happy to redistribute things in any way that we need to if we think that leads to the common good. So let's move on then next to this next layer of analysis about property rights and why we think what they say falls down. Because the reason that they tell you, right, that people should have a right to property in the first place is because they think that people should be able to hold on to things that they have worked for. This is not explained and it doesn't stand up for a number of reasons. Why? First of all, there is no sense in which ever there is a thing that a person can say that they themselves as an individual created without any help from anyone else, right? Even if you're going to work and you're creating something, you're relying on infrastructure that the society has provided to you, you're relying on a factory, you're relying on all these sorts of things. We think that communism is actually better in this case because the means of production are owned collectively. So literally everyone owns everything and everything is redistributed. So everyone is still enjoying the things that they've created, right? But we think that there is no right that any one individual has to say, I created this thing and I own it. We'd also like to point out there is literally no other system in the world that allows people to do that. If you look at capitalism, and if you want to look at theft of property, ladies and gentlemen, just take a look at the capitalist system where companies make profit out of the things that the workers actually work day in and day out to create. By your logic, you have to abolish capitalism and allow each worker to get the profit of the work that they do. That's what your analysis stands up for, and actually it sounds a lot closer to the theory of communism than any other theory of politics that I have heard of. I'll take a few away. Yeah, please, okay.
Sure, but the idea is that in such democracies, it's about proportionally how much you benefit from society, not irrespective of any effort equally.
Yeah, the problem is, right, that in democracies, some people will benefit more proportionately than other people. And actually in our system, right, you have a system where everyone's rights are respected equally, whereas in another system, necessarily some people have to suffer so that other people can have those things that they want to work for. If I want to work and make money, then the more I am able to privilege myself, the more I'm hurting other people. That is what we are saying is bad also in today's debate. So let's move on to this last point then, about individualism and versus collectivism. Because essentially what they want to say is that people should have a right to be selfish and that they should act individually rather than caring about the system. First of all, right, we think that people don't actually have a right to be selfish. We think that always leads to bad outcomes and it makes people be worse people and make worse decisions that don't care about other people, right? But second of all, right, we think that living in a society where people actually are altruistic and share things and care about other people makes people happier. And living in a society that is more equal also makes people happier because they don't have to be envious or jealous of other individuals within that society. But third of all, right, we think that people are more likely to make freely good decisions when they exist in a society that is collective and that has a principle of caring about other people, right? Because what benefits you and what benefits other people in your society has an equal effect upon everyone, then people actually will be choosing to give up the things that they've worked for. The theory of communism doesn't exist in which a world in which someone comes and puts a gun to your head and says, I'd like to have the potatoes that you work for all summer long. Maybe that's what happened in the USSR, I don't know. But we think the theory of communism is in a world where people will individually, freely choose to give up the things that they've worked for the benefit of the greater good, because it makes them happier as individuals, because it makes other individuals in their society happier, and that's also something they see as a benefit. We're very, very proud to stand for that in today's debate.
We now recognize the government whip.
When looking at the actions, we want to assess moralities or if concepts or ideologies. What we do is not say if some parts of it are moral and immoral, but if on balance they create immoral outcomes or an immoral theoretical framework that necessarily inherently will lead to immoral outcomes. That's what we're going to look at today. What I'm going to do is clearly define morality and then afterwards, for the fifth time or so, and then afterwards talk about theoretical frameworks and why inherently on 6 different levels the theoretical framework of communism leads to those negative outcomes. 2 little bits of rebuttal before that. So Monica doesn't want to talk about practical results, but then says communism somehow created social democracies, even though they already existed before 1917. What we do see is the fact that if anything in modernity, if you look at the US or anything, the shadow of communism, the demise of communism, is the main argument against social welfare policies, distribution, taxation, or anything. The fact that we think communism was terrible is the reason we have very limited social policies. So if you want to talk about practical outcomes, thank God that makes communism even more immoral. And then Rebecca tries to be smart and hide that their own definition of utilitarianism is even worse than any single definition previously provided, looking at, for example, that there's 0, probably, utilitarian Marxists out there in the world. Like, look at any single philosopher that looks like the maximum amount of goods created and that allow yourself on an absolute level how much you benefit from those things, right? If anything, we've seen that non-communist models create more goods, higher life standards, objectively measurably higher life standards for everyone following those models. So again, that model, if anything, is significantly worse. Now let's look about morality. So Rebecca is confused why morality is about humans. Possibly it's because humans are the only animal that have morality, or the concept of morality, or that even bother to talk and define what morality means. The entire logic that we are talking about is now that we as humans look at what differentiates us. What is moral is treating us as humans, treating us in the way that we want to be perceived, not as mere animals. And then we're correctly right as saying food and shelter should be provided, needs to be provided, and is provided by an ambiguous large number of ideologies. It's not exclusive to communism, it wasn't created by communism. What we do see, however, is that there's something uniquely human, namely that we define the meaning of our own existence. That we stand up and think and bother to think and have the capacity to think what we want to achieve, why we want to live, what we wish for, and in which frameworks and with which tools we achieve those things. That's inherently human and is violated, even though, of course, Rebecca's monkey example deals a stifling blow through a general analysis, right? So let's look about a bit how that works, right? So we think immoral theories means that some theories sometimes fail. They're not necessarily moral. Like capitalism in a larger amount of cases maybe fails, maybe that's immoral. Social democracy in a large number of cases probably doesn't fail because it provides all the food and shelter and other things we talk about. Communism inherently fails because of the pure disregard of all those individualized human characteristics and facets and freedom we want to talk about. Okay, so here are the 6 points. No, a bit later, right? So, first, opinion and expression. So they say, oh, well, it's totally democratic. Like, if this was democratic, it would be called democracy, not communism, right? If you follow it, like, I mean, let's call the kid by his name, right? We largely talk about Marxist ideology based on Rousseau's theory of a volonté générale, of a general idea of what is good for the people, and often they don't recognize that. It often needs to be enforced upon them. Often there needs to be a class struggle to take them out of their ignorance, of the opiate of the people that is religion, of all those things that blind us and that through class struggle need to be overcome. Necessarily, that includes an amount of violence. Necessarily, that includes, furthermore, a complete disregard for your own opinion. Because it says, I don't value what you're thinking or what you're expressing right now. I don't bother to vote. I don't bother to have democratic elections because you might not know. It rejects on the first and primary level the idea of your own expression, thereby your individuality. Secondly, force. And Nika already points that out perfectly, right? Also, note that there's no magically kidney-creating machine, as maybe Rebecca force, because if we must contribute, if we pressure, if we ostracize those people that don't fulfill, then we can't have a society that at the same time says you can do whatever you want, right? Us all sitting at home playing Candy Crush doesn't provide food on the table, right? If you want to live in a society where we all can eat, we all have our things, it inherently is incompatible with the notion that we all do what we want. If now we still want to live in a society that allows us to eat, allows us to have shelter and certain luxury goods, inherently, necessarily, no matter how often you say the word theory, it includes some element of force. An element of force that decides that some people need to do some kind of work even they don't like doing that. Because art, even if you're all artists, doesn't feed us. Next point. Yeah, sure.
You're defending a system that actively encourages and puts equal pressure facing starvation and alienation, unless you accept the pain of those unfortunate and use it to your own advantage.
Right, except that look, the entire thing we've talked about here is we agree minimum standards are okay. Minimum standards and full equality are two completely separate concepts that you've conflated the entire time. So the next idea is about security and space to express yourself, right? That needs to have property. That's again where something inherently negative of communism doesn't work, right? The art I create, the shoes I build, whatever I do, the company I create, has certain things. I can decide what to do, how to produce, how much I work, how to develop my company, how to display my art, how to use the fruit of my labor. Inherently, all of those things, all of those self-expressions of myself through my work, through my labor, through my art, only functions if I have full control over that. And the only thing guaranteeing me control over those things is the property. That's the thing Nika consistently points out, that if you don't have property, you are deprived of all those capacities to express yourself. That's also true with self-affirmation, as Nika says, right? I mean, we are often egoistic to a certain degree. Egotism to an extreme degree is selfish and bad. Acknowledging the fact that we are no saints, but that occasionally, if in doubt, we will prefer ourselves as only human. The very fact of communism, of assuming we all have the same benevolent facts for everyone else, is again denying the very humanity of ourselves, namely denying the fact that occasionally, in quite a few cases, we prefer ourselves, right? And then there's the other idea of a certain internal motivation that we have. Again, it denies the fact that some people want to work harder, that we want to invest more energy, that we have different skills. Again, Marx's definition of the value of labor is how much time and effort, how much time I put into it. According to Marx, labor's value is the time I put into it, right? That neglects skill, that neglects motivation, that neglects that I as a person standing on the bench debating might have a different effort as someone else, in the same way that anyone in our society might achieve different things depending on how much input they put. What it essentially says is that it's meaningless how much I put into it, that it doesn't matter as an individual how much I care, what I achieve, what skills I use, how to train myself, because neither of those things will benefit me, neither of those things will belong to me, neither of those things will be within the realm of my own control. I think that's bad, because it takes away in a generalizing fashion the fruits you have. Sometimes we benefit, and proportionately, occasionally, we should contribute for that. That is not equal to taking away our property, our capacity of control, and ultimately our individuality. Please proceed.
There's a very simple question we have to ask ourselves in this debate, right? Because the question isn't, is this the best system possible? It's a very clear question what this debate is. Is communism, the theory of communism, immoral, right? And what we've heard from the other side is, at best, there are better systems, right? We haven't heard why there are links in the communist ideal that are immoral, which make the system immoral. There are two general lines of thought that go throughout the debate, right? The first one is that communism is immoral because because people have an inherent right to their property, and since communism takes this away, communism is immoral, right? Two things that we did about that, and this is going to go to my class, right? First of all, they agree that social democracy is moral. Social democracy takes away part of our right to desert, part of our right to own property, and therefore, a system which takes away part of your right to desert is not immoral, right? So they don't prove that final link. Moreover, Becker shows you why we don't have a right to desert, which receives almost no response from Pear whatsoever. What this means is, if we do not have a right to desert, and therefore communism doesn't have this flaw in it, it is not an immoral system. It doesn't have to be the best system, it is just not an immoral system. Second question that happens here is the entire idea of self-determination, right? What is morality is that a system needs to allow us to self-determine. Note again, Mr. Speaker, that every system they've proposed so far also doesn't allow for complete self-determination, right? Because they tell us that self-determination is doing everything I want, and any world in which being able to express yourself and like express yourself through your work and all that, any single system of governance and of ecology, of economics, right, makes you stop doing it. So all we have to prove in this debate, and this is exactly what Becker does, is that A, this is first class, we don't have desert, and therefore there isn't this problem in communism. B, that the right to self-determination, right, that we have a more moral structure in this debate. Note that propositions at no point prove that this is an immoral system, just at best that this is not the best system, so propositions in this debate cannot win. Sit down. So, let's start with the question of desert, right? Because what we hear from side proposition on desert is that we recognize that some selflessness is good, and that we have a right to ourselves, and the right to the fruit of our labors, right? That is her answer, right? The reason we have desert is because we have some weird right to ourselves that isn't analyzed, and therefore we have the right to desert. What does Becker mean, right? First of all, some underlying assumption behind this is that you've actually created this work, right? That this work is yours and yours alone versus a shared community of work, right? Now, note here, Madam Speaker, that they're trying to tell us that, no, listen, like, it's more of your work, right? But Becker already explains to you that the amount of work that you're actually doing is minuscule. Because even if you're the most brilliant physicist, Newton, who like comes up with this theory of gravity and the three laws of motion, the first thing he says is, I am a midget sitting on the shoulders of giants. He could not have done that had basic mathematics not been made. He could not have done that had society not made for him a place in which he could do that, right? So given that he does not have the tools to do this, the desert is not his, but the entire society. But moreover, right, we get this POI, it's relative to how much you work, right? But the entire purpose of what we're saying, right, is that you do not have this right to desert, because in order to have a right to desert, you have to be able to harm others. Anything that is yours alone, meaning it's not other people's, right? Now, given that each person is equal, right, that at the starting point, and this is the basic assumption throughout all cases, right, that each person is completely equal, right, there is no right to infringe upon someone else in order to get it for yourself, right? So the inherent concept of desert is immoral because it harms other people by getting your own thing on instead of someone else, right? So what we see here, that the system in which there is the least desert possible is, yeah, we all like cake, right? the system in which there is the least desert possible is the most moral system. But again, and I like to prove this, our burden is not to show that it's the most moral system, just that it is not immoral. Sure. And therefore taking away people's property, which is what they say is basic conception. I'll take first after the point, right? The basic thing, and this is like after 5 different versions of what is communism, right? The basic thing is you do not have a right to property. This is what Becker proves. Right? They have a problem with the fact that we say you don't have a right to property. We prove that you don't have a right to property. We win this debate first.
So you're the one who is doing that. You are using our models, our criteria, showing that they exist in capitalism, social democracy, or whatsoever, and say that from that there is a logical step that communism is moral.
Sorry, I don't need to prove that there are other moral systems, right? I just have to prove that communism is a moral system, right? That's the debate. Okay, second question, right? How did the outcomes? Because what we hear from second proposition, and note their logic, right? Morality is a differentiation from us, from animals, right? What is that differentiation? Self-determination. So we already show you A, that this is like bullshit, right? But B, that this is not actually self-determination. And then Farah says something interesting, right? The difference is that we are moral actors, which makes it seem, right, that the most moral situation would be the situation in which people make the most moral actions, right? And this is what Becca comes and proves to you, right? Because first opposition says you're likely to make more choices because people are telling you to give things to others. And closing government say, well, that's just forcing you into things, right? But then Becca explains, right, that the fact that you live in a community, in a society, that makes it clear that the other is just as important as you, means you're more likely to choose, that you're more likely to choose this action, the moral action, and not be forced into it, as opening said. And therefore, by their own criteria of the differentiation between animals and humans, what makes moral actors, we win there too. Thank you.